Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose was published 40 years ago. It became a foundational document for a whole genre of mystery fiction. It was made into a movie and then later made into a TV series. And it launched his career as a novelist, having a lifetime as a scholar. And it introduced people to some problems in philosophy. I mean, come on. What'd you think? You knew when you were coming here. We're talking philosophy. Il nome della rosa by Umberto Eco was published 40 years ago. It appeared in the U.S. as The Name of the Rose in 1983. It's a delightful book filled with medieval history, political and ecclesiastical intrigues, contemporary discussions of problems in philosophy, and insights into life in a monastery, particularly a monastery with a glorious, glorious library. As the visual adaptations in 1986 and 2019 have made clear, the apparent plot is that of a medieval historical murder mystery. However, it is a philosophical exercise dealing with at least 4 problems of particular interest to me. While I expect to spend an episode on each of the 4 problems, I thought a nice overview might attract people to see the individual episodes, or at least induce them to read The Name of the Rose for its philosophical content. A very quick summary. I suppose I should say spoiler alert, but the book was published 40 years ago, and as I've said, it's adapted into both a movie and a TV series, so I really don't think I'm spoiling anything. An important ecclesiastical meeting has been called at a monastery in Northern Europe. A Franciscan monk, William of Baskerville, who's present anyway for the conference, has been asked to deal with a mysterious death associated with the monastery's celebrated library. William's traveling companion, a novice monk called Adzo of Melk, serves as Watson to William's Holmes as together they resolve the mystery around a series of, frankly, weird murders that ultimately lead to a fire that destroys the library. Now, I'm going to be using 2 pages right at the end of the novel as the springboard for my discussion. Now, here is the text in question.
It was the greatest library in Christendom, William said. Now, he added, the Antichrist is truly at hand, because no learning will hinder him any more. For that matter, we have seen his face tonight. Whose face? I asked, dazed. Jorge, I mean. In that face, deformed by hatred of philosophy, I saw for the first time the portrait of the Antichrist, who does not come from the tribe of Judas, as his heralds have it, or from a far country. The Antichrist can be born from piety itself, from excessive love of God, or of the truth, as the heretic is born from the saint and the possessed from the seer. Fear prophets, Adzo, and those prepared to die for the truth, for as a rule they make many others die with them, often before them, and at times instead of them. Jorge did a diabolical thing because he loved his truth so lewdly that he dared anything in order to destroy falsehood. Jorge feared the 2nd book of Aristotle because it perhaps really did teach how to distort the face of every truth so that we would not become slaves of our ghosts. Perhaps the mission of those who love mankind is to make people laugh at the truth, to make truth laugh, because the only truth lies in learning to free ourselves from an insane passion for the truth. But, Master, I ventured sorrowfully, you speak like this now because you are wounded in the depths of your spirit. There is one truth, however, that you discovered tonight, the one you reached by interpreting the clues you read over the past few days. Jorge has won, But you have defeated Jorge because you exposed his plot. There was no plot, William said, and I discovered it by mistake. The assertion was self-contradictory, and I couldn't decide whether William really wanted it to be. But it was true that the tracks in the snow led to Brunellus, I said. It is true that Adelmo committed suicide. It was true that Vinicius did not drown in the jar. It was true that the labyrinth was laid out the way you imagined it. It was true that one entered the Finis Africae by touching the word Quator. It was true that the mysterious book was by Aristotle. I could go on listing all the true things you discovered with the help of your learning. I have never doubted the truth of signs, Adzo. They're the only thing man has with which to orient himself in the world. What I did not understand was the relation among signs. I arrived at Jorge through an apocalyptic pattern that seemed to underlie all the crimes. And yet it was accidental. I arrived at Jorge seeking one criminal for all the crimes, and we discovered that each crime was committed by a different person or by no one. I arrived at Jorge pursuing the plan of a perverse and rational mind, and there was no plan, or rather, Jorge himself was overcome by his own initial design, and there began the sequences of causes and concauses and causes contradicting one another, which proceeded from their own, creating relationships that did not stem from any plan. Where is all my wisdom, then? I behaved stubbornly, pursuing a semblance of order when I should have known well that there is no order in the universe. But in imagining an erroneous order, you still found something. What you say is fine, Adzo, and I thank you. The order that our mind imagines is like a net or like a ladder built to attain something. But afterward you must throw the ladder away because you discover that, even if it was useful, it was meaningless. Was gleichsam die Leiter abwerfen, so an ihr aufgestiegen. Is that how you say it? That's how it's said in my language. Who told you that? A mystic from your land. He wrote it somewhere. I forget where. And it's not necessary for somebody one day to find that manuscript again. The only truths that are useful are instruments to be thrown away. You have no reason to reproach yourself. You did your best. A human best, which is very little. It's hard to accept the idea that there cannot be an order in the universe, because it would offend the free will of God and his omnipotence. So the freedom of God is our condemnation, or at least the condemnation of our pride. I dared, for the first and last time in my life, to express a theological conclusion. But how can a necessary being exist totally polluted with the possible? What difference is there then between God and primogenial chaos? Isn't affirming God's absolute omnipotence and his absolute freedom with regard to our own choices tantamount to demonstrating that God does not exist? William looked at me without betraying any feeling in his features, and he said, "How could a learned man go on communicating his learning if he answered yes to your question?" I did not understand the meaning of his words. "Do you mean," I asked, "that there would be no possible and communicable learning anymore if the very criterion of truth were lacking? Or do you mean you could no longer communicate what you know because others would not allow you to?" The Name of the Rose. Copyright 1980 by Gruppo Editoriale Fabbri Bompiani Snioso Etas S.P.A. English translation, copyright 1983 by Harcourt and Martin Secker and Warburg Limited.
Of particular interest to me is the sentence, "Perhaps the mission of those who love mankind is to make people laugh at the truth, to make the truth laugh, because the only truth lies in learning to free ourselves from an insane passion for the truth." Now, personally, I'm at once reminded of Nietzsche's many exhortations to learn to laugh at the truth. To laugh at oneself as one would have to laugh in order to laugh out of the whole truth. To do that, even the best so far lacked sufficient sense for the truth, and the most gifted had too little genius for that. This passage occurs at the very beginning, on the very first page, in the very first section of Nietzsche's The Gay Science, Die Fröhliche Wissenschaft, the book about which I wrote my dissertation. Eco seems to be following Nietzsche in arguing that truth is not a serious matter. Indeed, that life itself is not a serious matter. Please don't take this to mean that any of the three of us consider life to be trivial. This life, our life today, is the only life that we have, for sure, and so cannot be called trivial. Instead, we're suggesting that the only proper response to being alive is to laugh. Again, Nietzsche. And we should call every truth false which was not accompanied by at least one laugh. Life is not to be cried about, but to be laughed over. The fool understands the human condition, not King Lear. At this point, Adzo takes William to be disparaging the truth. William makes it clear the truth is only present in signs. When we try to interpret these signs into a higher network of truth, he fears we may be going beyond our capacity. Here, Eco is running together two issues that he's discussed throughout the whole novel. First is the problem of universals. Now, this is a metaphysical issue. By metaphysics, I'm talking about, in this case, ontology, the study of being. What is it that exists? Where do concepts come from? Where do qualities come from? Where do relationships come from? What we're asking is the primary logical unit the universal from which all particulars are derived, or particulars from which all universals are built? It's really a question of, do we go from the ground up or from the top down? Now, this has an epistemological, that is to say, a knowledge foundational parallel in the problem of induction. After all, if reality is founded in a transcendental higher plane, reasoning from universals to particulars, which we call deduction, can serve as the basis of all knowledge. We just have to discover what the universals are, and from them we can infer which particular truths truly apply. However, if the cosmos is rooted with particulars, that is to say, it is not the universal which gives the particulars life, but rather the particulars which we build into universals, then our reasoning has to be based on analogy, on family resemblance, on probability. And this form of reasoning, which we call induction, is never certain, unlike that other form, deduction, which is always certain. But if the world of the particular is the true world, that is to say, we conduct whatever philosophical investigation we can, we make the best discoveries we can, and if we should discover that what is primary is the particular, then the stuff we arrive at as being true, as being a system of knowledge, may neither be true nor a viable system. In fact, William seems to assert just that, suggesting that human reasoning can never understand a cosmos governed by God's will, since God's will is free and can change at any time. Years ago, I took a class in philosophy of mind We were particularly dealing with the problem of artificial intelligence. And there was a guy in the class who said, he said, well, I always thought maybe it worked like this, that God just sort of put things out there. And then Ptolemy comes along and he says, oh, well, let's just start with Plato. Plato comes along and he says, oh, the heavens all move on these perfect celestial forms, and it's all this great crystal structure with little dots in it. And God goes, son of a gun, let's make it. A little time goes by. Ptolemy's looking up at all this stuff, and he goes, no. See, there's some things that ain't working right up here. It's all traveling on circles, but some circles have little circles in them. Epicycles. And God goes, I love it. And then Copernicus, then Kepler, and right along down the path to modern cosmology. God just makes it the way it is. Why not? There's nothing to stop that from being the nature of reality. If God is free and if God is omnipotent, then any of our scientific knowledge is essentially meaningless. Now, Adzo takes this comment to its ultimate conclusion. If God, a necessary being, is free, then God is also contingent. Now, let me bring this a little sharper. We'll talk about it in more detail. But let me bring this just a little sharper. Adzo says, God is God and is necessary. He cannot be other than God. If he could be other than God, then he wouldn't be the foundation of the universe. However, God is free. God has to be free. God has to be empowered to do whatever he wants to. Otherwise, he's not really omnipotent. But then there's something contingent about God's will. It could be other. I mean, that is, after all, basically what we mean when we say free will. It could be other than what we picked. If God's will is free, then he could have picked other than he did. How then can the necessary exist polluted with the merely possible? Now, this critique of the argument from necessity for the existence of God, along with the questions it raises for the logical consistency of an omnipotent being, will be the last of my 4 programs on the Name of the Rose. In the Name of the Rose, Eco shows that the discussion of philosophy need not be dry and boring. Like Wittgenstein, Eco seems to think philosophy can be taught through jokes and humorous anecdotes, or at least lightweight murder mysteries. After all, considered an abstraction, if you just look at the conditions of each, the death of the monks are at least mildly ironic and slightly humorous. Only in the context of actually being human life taken, which after all it really isn't, it's just a novel, you know. Only then, in the context of the death as something in the novel, the humor disappears. Each of the philosophical issues we've talked about play a role in moving the plot along. But philosophy transcends this plot, as all good novels should. Now, I hope I shed some light on these issues and that I've encouraged you to at least read The Name of the Rose for its philosophical content. I certainly invite you to come back. I hope you will come back for my more extended discussions of comedy and laughter, of the problem of universals and of induction, and the argument from necessity for the existence of God. But in the meantime, keep talking philosophy. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please consider subscribing and sharing with your friends so we can all continue to talk philosophy. This video is produced under the patronage of George Hales, our executive producer, and courtesy of Andrew Beeman Cavallaro, our producer. Joining our team, Lesia Beznosko, format consultant. If you have watched at least 5 videos from this channel, I would like to list you as a friend of the channel. Please let me know your handle in the comments section. Thank you so much, and keep talking philosophy.